Welcome everybody to a first live stream I've done in a while, and I wanted to do the topic of editing history, which has to do with either added or a missing time or something like that, where whichever way you want to look at it. So yes, I'm going to try to play a video from one that I had before, as I mentioned in the description, and hopefully it will work. And if you can't hear the audio, let me know, and I'll try to fix it later, I guess. But anyway, I'm going to try to play this, but first I think I want to show a little intro thing here. And this is from Quora, and take that for what it's worth. But as I said, we're just going to introduce this, play an older video clip, and then go over some newer material. Good to see everybody in the chat. So I'm going to start off with this question. It isn't directly related, but it brings up the issue of time that's been changed or altered. And the question is, if 1,000 years of history was added to our current timeline by monks living in the 16th century, is it possible that King Arthur existed in a time much closer to their own, but was pushed back 1,000 years or so no one could find him? So we're assuming motive. Is it possible? These aren't scientific questions, of course, but they raise some interesting ones. And here's a typical response. He says, it's possible. What I find interesting is that there are no dates on any of the so-called documents from the 11th century, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th century, that's into the 1600s. There are no dates on the statues, supposedly from those eras as well. Apparently we're supposed to take historians at their word and believe the documents are from the eras in which they say, without doing proper research to validate them. This is how history is made, no validation, no research. Just believe what the authorities tell you and you'll live. Now, I can find a number of things, problematic things in that statement. First of all, is he or she is making an inference and saying, what do you think? There aren't dates on these documents. So they're leading you to a conclusion without actually saying it. And because there are no dates, they have concluded, or they want you to conclude, that these things weren't legit. Now, if I wanted to fake history, don't you think I'd put dates on it? Anyway, he says, apparently we're supposed to, and the thing is, he's assuming, or wants you to assume, that historians did no research. I don't know where that comes from, but anyway, and sorry about the lighting on the camera. I've got, I tried to put in some extra light on one side of my face, but who needs to see me anyway? I'm just testing things. But he says that who hasn't done proper research is the question I would ask, because is he assuming that historians didn't do research, or should we assume that this anonymous didn't do research? And he's saying you're just supposed to swallow what authorities tell you. Is he being sarcastic, he or she? And I agree, you shouldn't just swallow what authorities tell you, but you should look into what they've done before you make accusations or inferences. And there's this response. How would 16th century monks forge historical records in China or India, both of which traded with the Roman Empire? How would no one note that there was a missing millennium in both their histories, or else an added one in ours? Could they even alter records in the Muslim lands of the Middle East? All these places had their own historical records. Surely modern historians would notice if, for example, it were possible to correlate Muslim dating of Muhammad and the caliphates with our Western records. For that matter, the schism between Eastern and Western Orthodox Christianity is a real thing. How would those monks manage to alter two different sets of histories between churches that weren't in communion with each other and rarely cooperated? This is what I would call asking the right questions. It's a line, of course, from iRobot, where the holographic murder victim who pre-recorded some things said, you must ask the right questions. That's what's needed in research, asking the right questions. You should ask some of the skeptics as well as those making claims to the contrary. And thank you for kind comments in the chat. And I'll try to deal more with those later afterwards because I want to. This video will go to my other channels where I don't do this live, and so a lot of things won't make sense. So I'll kind of try to save those for the end. Anyway, the question is raised, the inference is made, and some awesome apparent, what I would think is reasonable questions are raised to challenge the challengers. Okay, now I'm going to try to run a video here. Let me push some buttons and try to get rid of other things blocking it. And this is the document I'm going to go over, but let's see. I'm not sure why that's showing on the screen. Okay, that's from my video. Never mind, I confused myself. Anyway, here we go, and I'll play it, and please tell me in the chat if you do not hear the audio. And I hope this will run for 15 to 20 minutes. I have it on 1.5 speed, so it doesn't take too long. But if you can't hear it, it won't be any point in playing it. So here we go. Let me know if you can hear anything. If you can't, tell me. Herbert Illig, born 1947. First published in 1991, so it took a while to be published. The hypothesis proposes, I don't know exactly when he came up with it, but he was born in 47, and then this theory came out in 91. It proposes a conspiracy by the Holy Roman Emperor Otto III, Pope Sylvester II, and possibly the Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII to fabricate the Anno Domini dating system retrospectively, Deb, so that it placed them at a special year of AD 1000 and to rewrite history. Illig believed that this was achieved through the alteration, misrepresentation, and forgery of documentary and physical evidence. According to this scenario, the entire Carolingian period, I'd have to look up that, including the figure of Charlemagne, would be a fabrication with a phantom time of close to 3 centuries, AD 614 to 911, interesting numbers, added to the early Middle Ages. This proposal found no favor among mainstream medievalists, which some people will dismiss out of hand right there, hey Vic, because mainstream is an evil word. It's the M word. You can't say mainstream because everything mainstream is absolutely horrible and a lie and satanic, even though the kind of people who make those charges are openly satanic in many cases. So, pot, meat, kettle. But the thing is that you find with, just as in the first, the video I did last November, Time Warp, people are always trying to mess with the birth of Jesus, with Christianity, not with anybody else when they try to do these altered timelines. It's the same with Egyptology. There was a video that I can't remember the documentary, the name of it, that showed very convincingly that Egyptology is off by several hundred years. Why? Because, as they showed in the documentary, there is motivation to hide the Hebrew presence in Egypt in the time the Bible says they were there. So it's always, all these time warps are about hiding Jesus somehow. And this later one is no exception. And so it has to do with the Roman Catholic Church and Constantine and people allegedly trying to shoehorn themselves into Bible prophecy, which when you think about it, as I've gone over before, the Catholic Church especially did not want to be fulfilling Bible prophecy because it was being rightly connected to prophecies of Revelation, especially that talked about the woman riding the beast and so forth. And so they would be the last people to come up with this, just like they were the last people who would come up with a pre-trib rapture or anything like that. But you get into the second section on this Herbert Illig, born in Bavaria, active in an associated dedicated to Immanuel Velikovsky and catastrophism and historical revisionism. Who is this Velikovsky? That should raise a red flag, anybody who's been around the conspiracy realm. So I clicked their link, and it's as good as any, so it was easy to do. Immanuel Velikovsky was a Russian. You can see the data there. died in 79, a Russian Jewish independent scholar. Now, immediately, the people who have been promoting in the recent years that there is this timeline conspiracy, this phantom time hypothesis, and pushing that hypothesis are the same people who hate Jews with a passion and think that the powers that be must all be Jewish and the nation of Israel should be wiped out, just like Bible prophecy said it would be the motivation in the end days. And here they are promoting a theory in their hatred of all things biblical, a guy who is a Jew, or was, I should say. And independent scholar, author of a number of controversial books reinterpreting the events of ancient history, in particular the U.S. bestseller Worlds in Collision, published in 1950, played a role in the founding of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in Israel, was a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst. So those are two legitimate red flags, because those are not sciences, those are more religions. And again, the irony of people not knowing the founders of what they think are novel theories that set the record straight, because they don't want to believe that there was certain passage of time, especially in Europe. But they're relying on this Jewish guy that came up with the theory, and it's just ironic because they always, almost without exception, hate anything Jewish or biblical. But this certainly was not a biblical person, but it is a Jew. So there you go. His books use comparative mythology and ancient literary sources, including the Old Testament, just like the syncretists do today, to argue that Earth suffered catastrophic close contacts with other planets, Venus and Mars, in ancient times. In positioning Velikovsky among catastrophists, including Bellamy and Donnelly and all these other people, they noted that he was not so much the newest catastrophist. Say that 5 times fast. He was in a line of them going back to medieval times and probably earlier. Velikovsky argued that an electromagnetic effect played an important role in celestial mechanics. Now, this kind of overlaps the theory of the Thunderbolts project about ancient cosmology, that all these gods and mythology, their myths and so forth, and religions were talking about a very different Earth and very different skies. Symbols of an Alien Sky is one of their videos, I think, that talks about that these were electrical events. And I think a lot of that is probably true, because the pre-flood world was very different from the world that we have all known. But there's always truth and error mixed together, so we have to be careful. And he proposed a revised chronology, it says here, for ancient Egypt, Greece, Israel, and other cultures of the ancient Near East. The revised chronology aimed at explaining so-called Dark Age of the Eastern Mediterranean, around 1100 to 750 BC, and reconciling biblical history with mainstream archaeology and Egyptian chronology. And as I've said, Egyptian chronology was already altered, so he's trying to bend it to something that was already messed up. They say here, in general, Velikovsky's theories have been ignored or vigorously rejected by the academic community. Take that however you want. Nonetheless, his books are often sold well, gaining enthusiastic support in lay circles, often fueled by claims of unfair treatment for Velikovsky by orthodox academia. So if he's seen as a rebel to the mainstream, and yet again, they think that the Jews are behind everything mainstream, so this has got to be awfully confusing, except that people, when they're confronted with facts like these, tend to bury their heads in the sand and pretend it's not there. Then you can read more about Velikovsky, and it's kind of a long link, so I don't know if I'm going to post it in the chat. You can find your own, material on these things. But anyway, all that to say that this is where this Herbert Illig got his phantom time hypothesis. Okay, so and then there's all these publications that they mention. It says since 1995, so not that long ago, he worked as a publisher and author under his own publishing company and his own journal. Outside of his publications related to revised chronology, he has edited the works of Ergun Friedel. Before focusing on the early medieval period, Illig published various proposals for a revised chronology and prehistory of ancient Egypt. So again, going back to this Velikovsky guy, I think they said yeah, I should read a little bit more about him first, that he was born in 1895 to a prosperous Jewish family. So we've got Jews and money in Russia, now in Belarus, and learned several languages, did well in Russian and mathematics. I think it was him or the other guy, I read over these quickly, that he was, one of those two is involved with Sigmund Freud. I think it had to be this guy, yeah. Lived in what was the British Mandate of Palestine from 1924 to 1939, practicing medicine in general practice, psychiatry, psychoanalysis, which he had studied under Sigmund Freud's pupil, William Steckel, in Vienna. So this is the kind of guy who is the root of the theory of phantom time, that is to say, lost time, at least in medieval Europe. And if the Jews are behind everything, then who is, how can these people who hate Jews rely on one of those evil, quote unquote, people to tell them that there was something wrong with history? This is, the left hand and the right hand, sock puppets pretending to be opposition. This is controlled opposition. So when people are pushing these theories, they don't look back far enough, and even within their 400-year limit, it seems, for reliable history, and see who was behind it. So yeah, this guy was Freudian. Anyway, this Herbert Illich got his ideas from that guy Velikovsky, and before he got into focusing on the medieval period, the early medieval period, he published these proposals, received prominent coverage in German popular media in the 1990s. So again, not that long ago. He received scholarly recensions, but was universally rejected as fundamentally flawed by historians. And then you got to ask, who are the historians? And then you have to say that this conspiracy was huge to hide things if they're trying to put this guy down. But why would they if he's a rich Jew who studied under Freud? See how complicated these things get? It's just like the same situation with Jesuits and the rapture theory and futurism. And I did the video on that. And this is just the same thing, lather, rinse, repeat, where people don't look far enough into the tangled web behind certain theories and don't realize that they would have to reject their own theories if they looked at who was behind them. So yeah, it's layered and it's complicated and it's interweaved, and that's how lies are spread. But again, the irony of people today's conspiracy awake people pushing this theory of phantom time hypothesis that came ultimately from what they themselves would say without question are the powers that be. And that's the main point of it, why I wanted to do this. But anyway, so going on about this, what was his name, Illich, they were rejected by the mainstream. So again, take that how you will. And he continued to publish on this phantom time hypothesis until at least 2013. So this is not an old, this is not something from long ago, from the disputed period. It's within our lifetime. It says also published on an unrelated topic of art history, German Renaissance, but again, proposing revisions to conventional chronology and arguing for the abolition of the art historical category of mannerism. So, if you're an art historian, that might matter to you. I am not. Anyway, here's the main points of his theory. And these match up with other things that I looked up. Point one, the scarcity of archaeological evidence that can be reliably dated to the period AD 614 to 911. The perceived inadequacies of radiometric and dendrochronological methods, which, if you break that word down, dendro has to do with plants and chronology is time. So they can use plants to determine when something happened. This is done on a shorter term in forensic science, where they can say, well, how long was the victim dead? And they can say, well, these certain insects, these certain plants were present, and therefore here's the limits of the time that they could have been deceased. And so you can do this on a longer scale with plants and the material that things were written on or etched into and so forth, and inks and colors. And these are all, fairly objective sciences. It's when you get into the million billion year range with radiometric dating, you really have problems, because those dating methods aren't too bad in the short range, a few hundred years to maybe a few thousand. But after that, all bets are off. And that's why evolution is bunk. That's one of the many reasons. But the point is, on shorter ranges like this, you can use that. Anyway, this guy was saying, no, this is all bunk, wipe it all out. And that's, basically his first point, is that none of the dating methods of physical things are reliable. The second point is the presence of Romanesque architecture in the 10th century Western Europe, suggesting the Roman era was not as long ago as conventionally thought. I'm not sure why there's an expiration date on Roman architecture. Look at Washington, D.C. and all the pillars and Greek and Roman architecture. I'm not sure what point he was trying to make there, but let's go on. Third point, the relation between the Julian calendar, Gregorian calendar, and the underlying astronomical solar or tropical year. Tropical having to do with tropos. The reason the name for the tropics is the turning points of the sun through the seasons. That is to say, the farthest point at which the sun will go from the equator, where it's possible for your location that the sun will go 90 degrees overhead. That's how you define the tropics. Okay, so there's only a certain distance above and below the equator where the sun will go 90 degrees overhead. And that's what the tropics are, and that's what they're talking about. I'm looking at the word tropical, trying to say talking. Solar or tropical year. So that was the third point, was about how, calculating the movements of the sun and moon and how they affect the calendars. The Julian calendar, introduced by Julius Caesar, that's why it's named the Julian calendar, was long known to introduce a discrepancy from the tropical year, that is to say the solar year, of around 1 day for each century that the calendar was in use. By the time the Gregorian calendar was introduced in AD 1582, Illig alleges that the old Julian calendar should have produced a discrepancy of 13 days between it and the real or tropical or solar calendar. Instead, the astronomers and mathematicians working for Pope Gregory the 13th had found that the civil calendar needed to be adjusted by only 10 days. The Julian calendar day, Thursday, 4th of October, 1582, was followed by the first day of the Gregorian calendar, Friday, the 15th of October, 1582. From this, Illig concludes that the AD era had counted roughly 3 centuries, which never existed. So those are his main points of the theory of the phantom time hypothesis. And again, this guy got his ideas from Immanuel Velikovsky, the rich Jew, who studied under Sigmund Freud's protege, or whatever word they called it, student or pupil. Criticisms of the theory. The first point, the most difficult challenge to the theory, is through observations in ancient astronomy. Hello, M. Swift. Especially those of solar eclipses cited by European sources prior to 600 AD, when phantom time would have distorted the chronology. Besides several others that are perhaps too vague to disprove the phantom time hypothesis, 2 in particular are dated with enough precision to disprove the hypothesis with a high degree of certainty. One reported by Pliny the Elder in his Natural History, the eclipse of the sun, which chanced before the, whatever that is, Calends of Maj, when as certain people were consuls or officials of some sort, was seen in Campania between the 7 and 8 hours of the day in 59 AD, so forth, so forth. Anyway, they're citing and quoting, hey, Daniel, I think I said, shouted everybody else out. Sorry if I missed you. But anyway, cited these people as giving a report of solar events in their time. And they go on in this point to say, in both of these dates and times have confirmed eclipses. In addition, observations during the Tang dynasty in China and Halley's Comet, or Halley's, for example, are consistent with current astronomy with no phantom time added. Now, when it comes to using astronomy to time things or go back in time, we're talking about observations, not Earth shape and not cosmology. We're just talking about what people saw happen and when, and how they noted by taking careful observations what the patterns were. This is how the ancients knew when things were going to happen with extreme accuracy. It's because it wasn't that they were mathematicians so much, but that they were very good at observation, and they kept track and kept meticulous records of when things happened, so they knew when they would happen again. And so that's all they're referring to here in this first point of criticism, is the fact that because of these astronomical events, then the phantom time hypothesis couldn't possibly be true. And they bring up the Tang dynasty in China, because the Chinese also kept very good records. And this phantom time hypothesis only focuses on Europe. They would have to also deal with the timelines of other countries that kept good records, and China being the chief one of those, the easiest to confirm and the most reliable, in all probability, that this doesn't add up to them. Their astronomical records show that there was no missing time. So the second point, archaeological remains and dating methods such as dendrochronology refute rather than support phantom time. In other words, they dispute Illig's claims that, again, he got from Velikovsky, that these tests of dating things, whether they use carbon dating or trees and bugs and things like that to date things, which is legitimate. They say these things do not support Illig's proposal or contention that there are close to 400 years missing in medieval history. Well, again, it would have to be missing in everybody's history. And if you take those years out, then you've got a discrepancy with the rest of the world, is the problem. And that's, in the first point, they studied it from the angle of cosmology and found that the records that were kept to keep track of these events are reliable, and they don't support the phantom time hypothesis. And so the second point then is about dating methods. Take them as you will, but they say, no, these dating methods do not support the claims. They refute the claims. The third point, the Gregorian reform was never purported to bring the calendar in line with the Julian calendar as it had existed at the time of its institution in 45 BC, but as it had existed in 325, the time of the Council of Nicaea, which had established a method for determining the date of Easter Sunday. That was one of the things, if you remember my recent video on Constantine, it was really not the whole thrust of the video. It was just the beginning stuff that I got out of the way about Constantine and the Council of Nicaea, not having to do with the Bible canon, but with, among other things, mainly to settle a dispute between Athanasius and Arius on the divinity of Christ. But they also had other business to attend to, which had to do not with the canon, but with determining the date of Easter and some other little things. And they were trying to force fit. Yes, they were. But this, again, does not work for the phantom time hypothesis. So they go on here, establishing Easter Sunday by fixing the vernal equinox on March 21 in the Julian calendar. By 1582, the astronomical equinox was occurring on March 10th in the Julian calendar, but Easter was still being calculated from a nominal equinox on March 21. In 45 BC, the astronomical vernal equinox took place around March 23rd. Illig's 3 missing centuries thus corresponds to the 369, there's an interesting number, 369, think of Tesla, years between the institution of the Julian calendar in 45 BC and the fixing of the Easter date at the Council of Nicaea in AD 325. So again, take everything how you will, but the problem is that what Illig claimed was accounting for that, arguing against 369 years, that it really isn't, that those years did not take place. He's failing miserably in the scientific method, and any method you want to, call something like that, where you look at evidence and try to be objective. And their last point here, if Charlemagne and again, this is hard for me to pronounce for some reason, Carolingian dynasty were fabricated, which is what the theory claims, there would have to be a corresponding fabrication of the history of the rest of Europe, including Anglo-Saxon England, the papacy, and the Byzantine Empire. The phantom time period also encompasses the life of Muhammad and the Islamic expansion into the areas of former Roman Empire, including the conquest of Visigothic Spain. this history too would have to be forged or drastically misdated. It would also have to be reconciled with the history of the Tang dynasty of China again, and its contact with Islam, such as at the Battle of Talas. So we have the history of Islam, which as a Christian, I would have no motivation to try to corroborate. So, anybody thinking I'm just trying to force fit things of my own would be wrong, because, we would all like to believe that was a complete fabrication. But here we have China with no dog in this hunt, essentially saying that they fought battles with the Muslims, at a certain place in time. So again, this whole theory just falls apart when you actually investigate it, especially outside of just the narrow area that Illig and Velikovsky wanted it to be restricted to. Okay, I'm hoping you can still hear me. I muted myself during that, so I think I pushed the right button. And yes, behind me you see the command deck of the NSEA Protector from Galaxy Quest, probably my favorite movie. And so just to have something different for after finishing the Falling Flat series, needed to freshen up the place, so that's what I did. Anyway, hopefully this information that we just heard on the video, it didn't seem like it's there's been anything to change my mind on that as far as I could determine. And I wanted to show you the thumbnail of this video again before I go on. All right, thanks for that. Editing history, because in the negatives down here, you can see people doing things seasonally. They're plowing the ground, planting seeds, harvesting, and that, the things that, this is what I got when I looked up medieval calendars. And so it's interesting that one of them just had to do with showing pictures of what people did at certain times. And yes, knowledge is gained and lost through history. It is not an evolutionary idea of primitive to sophisticated. History is a series of ups and downs and people forgetting things and relearning. For example, we know that the ancient Romans had flush toilets and, hot and cold running water, basically, all these modern conveniences, but they were all lost when the Roman Empire fell and they had to be relearned. So that in itself isn't a proof of anything. The only thing it proves is that this happens all the time in history. And so we can't use that as a proof of missing quote-unquote time or added time, depending on whose history you're looking at. Now, I want to show, not this Quora article again, but this one from Big Think, a little more recent, 2023, so only a few months ago. And he says, well, she, I just, he is generic, but a sober look at a wild conspiracy theory that argues the Middle Ages never happened. I hate the term conspiracy theory. It is a manufactured term by the alphabet agencies in the U.S. to discredit anyone who would be a whistleblower or think outside the box. But a wild theory it may be. It doesn't have to be called a conspiracy theory. There are real conspiracies, and as one meme I should have had ready to go said, that they should be called, that modern conspiracy theories should be called spoiler alerts, because more often than not they turn out to be true. But the key takeaways here is, according to phantom time hypothesis, the years 614 to 911 AD never happened, allegedly fabricated by Pope Sylvester II and Holy Roman Emperor Otto III to give their reigns religious significance. While historians should always be skeptical about the past, the phantom time hypothesis is more conspiracy theory than scholarship. In other words, unfortunate use of the term, but they're saying, let's be skeptical also of the skeptics. We shouldn't take anybody's word for anything, but do the research, or at least examine the research, and see what, that we can corroborate something in that. He says, during a lecture on pop culture representations of Robin Hood, he asked, what if it's all a lie? The man, I can't pronounce it, Sturtevant, explained turned out to be an adherent of the phantom time hypothesis, a pseudo-historical, we've heard of pseudoscience, well, there's pseudo-history too, that claims the years 614 and 911 never happened, and every single historical artifact dated from this period is a lie. Now, they go over the origins, which is what my video clip was about, more in detail on that. And you can read also in here, reiterating a lot of the same stuff about the Gregorian calendar and Illig, who argued that the years were added by Pope Sylvester and Otto III to make things line up exactly 1 millennium after the birth of Christ. And he said, to hide their tinkering from future generations, Otto and Sylvester employed scribes to create and copy medieval manuscripts detailing fictitious events and individuals. After being distributed, these manuscripts would be mistaken for actual history. Among them were such historical figures as Charlemagne, king of the Franks and the so-called founder of Europe, and Alfred the Great, the king of England, who drove off the Vikings. Illig isn't the only writer to call the Middle Ages an invention, though. His Eurocentric version, which I went over in my first video, of the phantom time hypothesis exists alongside a Russocentric one. So there is one other non-European theory about this. Propagated by Moscow State University math professor Anatoly Fomenko, it posits that classical Greece, Imperial Rome, dynastic China, Pharaonic Egypt, and other ancient societies actually existed during the Middle Ages, and that civilization didn't get going until 800 AD. Again, this sounds awfully evolutionary to me, evolutionary bias, but anyway, his adjusted calendar creates an equally warped version of the past, one in which the New Testament was written before the Old. The Trojan War and the Crusades were the same conflict, and Genghis Khan and Attila the Hun were the same person. Anyway, debunking the hypothesis is what we're more interested here. Like most lies, the phantom time hypothesis contains a small kernel of truth. For instance, the vast majority of early medieval manuscripts are copies of lost originals, casting doubt on some of their exact details. It's also true that the European calendar has been revised on multiple occasions, with many a mathematically inclined monk tramping through a theological minefield to find the appropriate dates for Christmas, Easter, and other religious holidays. And I would remind anybody who doesn't know that tends to equate the Roman Catholic Church with all of Christianity, that that's a Roman Catholic problem. Finally, it is true that much of history, particularly ancient and medieval history, was written by victors. All historical accounts must be studied with a healthy dose of scrutiny and skepticism, calendars included. Okay? But phantom time hypothesis falls apart the moment you take a closer look, which few people seem to do. And sorry, I can't really pay attention to the chat just yet. While the European continent may not have many original manuscripts from the early Middle Ages, documents and artifacts from Asia, Africa, Australasia, and the Americas provide overwhelming proof that these missing centuries did indeed happen. Evidence of the missing centuries can also be found in nature. Tree rings chronicle the passage of time, and ancient and medieval documents of astronomical events like solar eclipses show that their observers lived in different periods. And here you see this giant tree section going back to 896. You know, they're just counting the rings. That's all they're doing, and putting a timeline according to that. This is on an 1,800-year-old redwood tree from California. Discussing why the phantom time hypothesis was created, why it remains so appealing. Perspectives of history, Leland R. Grigoli turns to politics and ideology. Just as the German hypothesis refuses to acknowledge a period when European society stagnated, so wanting to hide that, while others flourished, this is embarrassing to Europe, so does its Russian counterpart assert that the history of civilization began with the birth of Russia's parent state, the fiefdom of Kievan Rus. The phantom time hypothesis, Grigoli writes, is also a product of some very long-lived ghosts which continue to haunt medieval studies. It's based, for example, in a myopic, nationalistic Eurocentrism that has long defined the field, one which forgets or does not believe that there is any pre-modern history outside of Europe. Again, with the evolutionary, the religious, and the nationalistic motives for wanting to bend history and calendars and make certain things seem more significant than they are. The phantom time hypothesis is a conspiracy theory. Again, I hate that term. Posing as serious scholarship, while it can raise interesting questions in a pre-modern age sturt event, could it have been possible for humanity to just forget a day, a month, or a year? So while it can raise interesting questions, the hypothesis quickly spirals out into yet another paranoid fever dream about the shadowy elite who control and alter reality behind the backs of their constituents. Despite its sheer implausibility, the hypothesis has proven difficult to refute. This is partly because conspiracy theories are more emotional than logical. That's, of course, not true, but he's trained to look for causes for this. Belief in the 3 missing centuries can hardly be dispelled through facts because it is based first and foremost on deeply rooted mistrust of authority. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, you might say, to first of all hand-wave dismiss anything that comes from authority, and then as soon as you find evidence that happens to be associated with authority, you just throw that out as well and believe what you want. Then they go on here, then there's the nature of the phantom time hypothesis itself. As journalist Rex Sorgatz notes in his book, The Encyclopedia of Misinformation, I've never read that, I can't vouch for it, every bit of counter evidence, astronomical records, archaeological remains, carbon dating, etc., offers a new plot from a crypto historian. Each historical refutation requires another for its support, leaving an entire chronological framework susceptible to implosion. No matter how convinced you are that Charlemagne existed, can you prove it? A valid point, but then again, can you prove he didn't? And that's asking someone else to prove a negative, which is invalid. But the point I think that is well made here is that you must be skeptical of the skeptics as well. You can't hand-wave dismiss everything that's authoritative or from an authority because people are a mixture of truth and error, and your job as a true skeptic is to sort through those things. And how are you going to sort through them? You have to have standards, and you have to start somewhere. So I'm hoping today to have augmented the original video by just offering some more perspective, including the one I started with, which was, how did everybody miss the same years, and has anybody established that they have? And I don't think that's the case. So what I'm going to do right now is just put the thumbnail back up and see if I can look at the chat a little bit. We have only gone, about 45 minutes, which is fine. We don't have to do an hour. But let's see if we can catch up with the chat here. So if you're not watching this live, you can just kind of ignore this part. I'm just going to go back and say hi to people and that were live on YouTube. We had Divergent Droid, as always. Arrow, I don't know how to pronounce that. Spider Monkey. Geotolemy. Let's see who else we got here. Crockett. I think see. Oh, just trying to read the comments as I go as well. Jeff Gasshead, thanks for the kind compliments. Tony Whitcomb. And let's see, Anna Meekin. And yeah, I didn't know whether Velikovsky is like to the claims of Fomenko. I really just don't know. I haven't looked into that. Let's see. Camo. Yeah, modern day science pretty much is Kabbalah and a lot of other things. So I don't know, but the thing is that, again, we have to be discerning, and we have to make sure that we just don't hand-wave dismiss things, regardless of where they came from, as it can be a poisoning the well fallacy. Mark Collard, hope I didn't miss an I or anything, because some people are named Colliard, but pretty sure I didn't. Let's see, cool channel name. Can tell me that an eclipse happened in 600 AD, but struggled to tell me what he had for lunch. Okay. I struggle to remember what I had in any given meal. If somebody wants to know what I'm wearing today, I have to look down and see what I put on. We all have selective memory. So anyway, yes, there are many ironies. Let's see, starting with Newton. Recipe for beer from the Middle Ages, I think. Fish was banned until Fridays. That's why we still have fish and chips on Fridays. Okay. That's another Roman Catholic thing, is to not have meet on Friday or something during Lent. I'm not sure, but I'm glad all the audio's been working. I know digital cameras don't produce negatives, but I had let me show the thumbnail again. This is a roll of film. There's the big editing reel. This is a pair of scissors. So film has negatives. I'm just saying, that's just why I picked that. It's an older tech, but it's kind of indicates what people think of time in some ways. I don't subscribe to the B theory of time. I think if I don't get A and B mixed up, I think A theory is what we normally think of as tensed, meaning past, present, and future. That you can't travel it. It's what is done is done. The future is only a potentiality, not an actuality. Only the present is actual. Whereas the B theory of time states that time is like this roll of film, that it's already all been played out. You can travel it because you can wind the film, et cetera, et cetera. So I had a bunch of reasons for choosing that thumbnail. Let's see. Robin Hood, much pseudoscience, pseudo-history indeed. Yeah, lots of pseudo-history. Let's see, you love Kung Fu Shaolin, see you too, Price of Adam. I don't know if I mentioned you already. I mentioned Adam Meakin. James Mays. Let's see, who else? I'm looking also at questions. Ciao, there you are. Yeah, YouTube doesn't notify anybody, and I'm not on social media, but I tell Droid and he passes it around and I put it on one place in Skype, but I think that's about it. And I'm not keeping a schedule right now. I will try to always run at 1 o'clock when I do run. That's Eastern time. That's 6 o'clock UK and, let's see, 10 a.m. Pacific? Yeah, I think so. Let's see. I like them being not a conspiracy theory, pattern recognition. Yeah, absolutely. And just paying attention to things. That's all you have to do. All right. I think I'm caught up. All right. So, are there any other questions or comments? Let's see. 12 Central, yes. So basically, the U.S. Eastern Standard is the one I'm in. And there are 3 other time zones in the U.S. So if you're in Central, you're an hour. Like if it's 1 o'clock here, it's 12, 11, 10 across the U.S. And then you go forward to the U.K. So you add 5 from my location to get U.K. time. The point of bringing up what people ate in 600 AD is that if you look into it, nobody really knows, which doesn't surprise me, honestly, because when you think about the printing press wasn't invented till the 1500s, Gutenberg. Anything before that was handwritten, and not everyone could read and write, and not everyone could have access to materials that would last very long. And if you were a peasant, you weren't going to make any official documents that are well preserved or anything like that. But anyway, there are all sorts of variables that we need to be aware of when we try to do any kind of research. And this is one of those things, one of those topics where a theory or proposal gets passed around a lot before people have done any real research. It's one thing to watch a video or see a document somewhere, but another to actually go over those sources as critically as we would the mainstream sources, because nobody is exempt from scrutiny. But again, ask the right questions. Like I did when I first started reading the opening statements. I looked at what the reader was being led to, what they're being told to infer or imply. And I think the difference between those two words is infer is what the speaker or writer does, and imply is what the listener does. Anyway, hair splitting. So if there's nothing else, I will go back to my duties on the command deck of the NSEA Protector, whatever they are. I could be like the lady whose job was to just repeat the computer. It was her job, talk to the computer, which is kind of what I'm doing right now. Anyway, I don't see anything else other than I'll have to think of a topic for next time. If you have any other comments or ideas, put them in the comments under the video. Right, about 9/11. I mean, that was being gone over and questioned right away. But that does, of course, just to make that as an illustration, we know the narrative is a whole pile of lies, but the buildings did come down. So that's the kind of sorting and sifting we need to do when we look at something back in history. So I'm not sure, I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm just saying we need to be skeptical. And here's an example of how I would be skeptical of the skeptics as well as the authorities in the mainstream. And we just don't know how much of anything is true, but it comes to the point of absurdity when we say nothing is true. And when it comes to history, people often forget family genealogies. For example, my grandparents were in, like my one grandpa was born in the late 1800s. And so we have more than 100 years of personally verified history that the years existed, which is why, going back again to the thumbnail, I showed these seasonal activities, because whatever else anybody wants to say about whether years are missing, people always know that the seasons have been going around and around and around without fail, because you can't fake when there's snow on the ground. You can't fake when it's scorching heat. You can't, and people have to grow their food and harvest it and all sorts of things that happen on a regular cycle. So people can count years that way. If nothing else, if they had nothing else, they would count by the seasons. The thing is that you have to be discerning, and it's not easy, and you can never be 100% sure of anything. But don't go to the point of absurdity where you have this Zen Buddhist saying nothing is knowable, because that's a self-contradictory statement. You claim to know that nothing is knowable. So each of us has to find a point where we say, this is reasonable, this is not reasonable, and here's why I think that. And when the evidence used is outside of anybody's personal memory or their personal experience, and people can corroborate each other's stories, then you have something that's much more reliable. So take things from as many angles as you can get. Don't just blindly accept an idea because it sounds intriguing. And while it's true that you can't be 100% sure of anything, a lot of us are 100% sure of a lot of things. Some people are 100% sure that nothing is knowable, or that authorities are never, ever to be believed, even when they tell the truth. I'm 100% sure that there is historical evidence that's reliable, and that eyewitness testimony, especially from hostile witnesses, cross-examined witnesses, is valid, and that this has been done to the gospel writers by Simon Greenleaf, for example, one of the founders of the Harvard School of Law, who cross-examined the four gospel writers. And so it is not only probable, but as certain as anyone can be of anything, that Jesus rose from the dead. So that's a certainty I'm going to lean on, and my deep personal conviction, which as far as how to also have that personal conviction, I've done many videos and writings, and there's how to take that step of being saved are written in the description of my videos. So there you are. That's all I can do. And you can't fake the procession of the heavens as well. Those are the clock and calendar as established in Genesis 1. I don't know who's talking about Wikipedia, but not everything in Wikipedia is false either. You got to know where their prejudices are, which are many and varied, but still. Let's see, Wrong House, welcome. I don't think I've seen your name before, but thanks for coming. And Let's see. Spider Monkey said, even my mom, who doesn't know a lick of English, is enjoying your videos. Oh, okay. Translating. Oh, awesome. Thank you. Thank her. I hope I'm not too confusing at times, but that's awesome. So I think I'll round it out here, as the saying goes on other channels, to round things out. Yeah, history has been monkeyed with. Victors write it, but also in time, those victors are defeated and the other victors write it and rewrite it. So if you really want to know if something is likely, consider everything, including personal family histories and things that hostile witnesses I've mentioned before. So anyway, there you are. And like I said, I'm going to get back to talking to the computer on the Starship NSEA Protector. Yeah, I don't know who's reading from Wiki, but you do have to be discerning. They're not totally useless, only mostly useless, and it's up to you to figure out which parts are which. All right, thanks everybody for coming, and we'll see you some other time at 1 p.m. Eastern whenever I have something to say. So, thanks again. We'll see ya.